McNutt, alongside the good friend, host of the program, Mr. Andrew Gomison.
Adam, it's great to be back with you, and I actually have all three of my executive producers through the course of this podcast process with me on this show, and I'm very excited about that. And I have one special friend guest who we might also hear from a little bit later. But first of all, Adam, do you have our quote of the day?
Sure do. A saint is not someone who is good, but someone who experiences the goodness of God. That is from Brennan Manning.
And I thought this quote was appropriate because that's how I feel about this podcast. The success of this podcast has been the result of God's infinite blessings to me and the hard work and dedication of the people who are sharing the mics with me tonight. Without them, I would not have gotten as far as I have, and because of the COVID-19 lockdown situations that we found ourselves in, I have learned a lot about producing my own audio, and am pretty confident about moving forward with a home studio. Something I would not have told you 8 weeks ago when I ran out of shows.
So does this mean we're fired?
Actually, I'm hoping that all of you can periodically be involved, and it's easier than ever because we can all be in our own places rather than being on a set schedule in a studio. So it's easier to call all the shots, and it feels better to not have to come up with 3 shows at once. Because writing one show is hard enough. Writing 3 shows for a recording session can be very difficult. But I'm very thankful for the blessings God has given. I went on this show called Ignite with J.R. Pittman, and Adam McNutt was the producer. Now, I had heard a little bit about Adam because we actually had a mutual acquaintance that knew Adam before I did and told me about him. So when I rolled into the studio and he was there, I was like, I kind of know you. I know some things about you anyway. And so we really hit it off. I got his phone number that night, and we were texting back and forth for those months, I believe starting in January of 12.
Yeah.
And then about July, I think I wrote him a message and I said, I'm talking to Brad Lanzer at Lanzer Broadcasting, who owns WJQ, about using the studio for the purposes of podcasting. Would you be willing to be my executive producer and run the board for me so that I can produce this podcast? Because I can come in and talk, but I can't run the board unless they make special provision, and I'm not going to ask them to do that unless they were to hire me. Which, to go back even further, that was my hope, even though it never really materialized that way. But I was able, because of Adam, to produce over 200. I think we had either almost gotten to or just exceeded 250 episodes when you left, Adam, and it's even more than that when we think about the brief time that you came back to the show, which you can get into if you wish when you are reflecting. But to think that I was able to stick to something for 400 weeks, a lot of the podcasts that I listen to, they either pod fade or they take breaks and have off seasons. We've never done that on Speaking for Him. And so we've been through a lot. We've talked about a lot of issues. We've had a lot of good guests on. I've been very blessed to have the support of so many people to make this happen. And I will have more thank yous later. But first of all, I do have a highlight reel. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the highlight reel. And then after the highlight reel, I will get some reflections from Adam. And we'll go from Adam to Chad to Dan in in reverse order and talk about what it's been like to work on the podcast. This first clip is the way we opened the show all those years ago. My name is Andrew Gomison, and I will be your host for the Speaking for Him podcast. Excited about the inaugural episode, and I'm also excited that I have a co-host with me in the studio today, Adam McNutt of WJQ fame. Thank you, Adam, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Today, we're just going to talk a little bit about my ministry and how I came to start it and how I got to this point. So I hope this is a fun time for everyone listening. On this clip, I had a lot of fun with my radio mentors, Chris and Emily, in the studio. And they talk about all the places they traveled in the course of their ministry. One of the questions that some people, like myself, especially since it's hard for me to keep warm in the winter, would ask is, what would possess you to come from Arizona to a place like Michigan? But seeing that you were also in Alaska for a while, this must have been like the tropics compared to Alaska.
Quite honestly, it really is. It's kind of the best of all worlds. We grew up in Minnesota. Of course, it gets bitterly cold there. And we've lived all over. We've lived in Germany. We've lived in Alaska. We've lived in Arizona. And so we felt the extreme hot. We felt the extreme cold. And Michigan really is just, it's cold but not too cold, hot but not too hot. And we love the snow. Of course, growing up in Minnesota, you can take the snow out of the girl, but you can't take the girl out of the snow. How does that go? I don't know.
Not like that.
One of the absolute highlights of this podcast for me was getting to interview one of my favorite nationally syndicated radio hosts, Wally from The Wally Show. What follows is a clip of him talking about how important all of the people that work on his show are to him and to the show's success.
I think it would really be a fun show to work on. You change one of the people in our mix, and the show is different. And like Betty is, her skill set is humor and just that heart inside of the show. Becca, her skill set is kind of not letting me get away with too much and kind of keeping me in check, in a fun way. But then also when she does news, like to deliver that and do a good job with that and to be funny. And then Zach's job is to be that voice of reason and sometimes protect me from myself and the things that I want to do or the angles I want to go. He's really good at going, well, let's rethink this.
This clip is from an episode where I interviewed Lauren Chapin, star of the hit TV show Father Knows Best. Not only was it a thrill for me to interview her because she was a celebrity from a TV show I enjoyed, but I also enjoyed talking to her about the most important thing, her faith in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Do you have any final thoughts for those who are listening today? Maybe a final word of encouragement.
Well, we're living in a world today, Andrew, where there's so much animosity, bitterness, anger, resentment. It's sad. It's very sad what our young people are having to deal with today. But if I could be an encourager, I would simply say, first of all, I would say, if you don't know Jesus, that's the person you need to meet because he's going to be a friend that will stick with you forever and always.
In this episode, I got the opportunity to interview the owner and operator of the very first West Michigan Chick-fil-A, Brad Sperlin. This clip is where I ask him the question, what is the biggest blessing of having this responsibility?
You kind of talked around this a little bit, but could you quantify what you would think is the biggest blessing of working for Chick-fil-A?
I don't know that we have enough time. I thought, I pursued Chick-fil-A for 15 years before, opening. I thought I knew a lot about Chick-fil-A until I actually joined them. And one specific memory, I was down in Atlanta about my third day of training, and they took us on a visions and values tour of Chick-fil-A, and it just literally stopped me on my tracks of just the incredible blessings and contributions that Chick-fil-A makes all across the nation that you don't know about. And so one of the things that every operator is passionate about is how do we model Truett's generosity in our community. And so I would say that's been an incredible blessing, is to take the fruits and labor, take the blessings of our labor and our hard work and see where God wants to share it in the community. It's literally one of my daily prayers.
This final clip is from an episode that I did highlighting the movie Unplanned and discussing important issues related to the pro-life movement.
What were your general thoughts after you watched the film, Eric?
I think this film is going to be really important for those in the church. Frankly speaking, the church needs to wake up to what is going on with this particular issue. I think there's a lot of churches and even Christians out there who say that they're pro-life, but maybe they're just anti-abortion. Like, they know abortion is wrong, but how pro-life are you, and where are you willing to put your time, your talents, and your treasures behind a cause that really fights for life? I mean, if we're Christians, if we're believers in Jesus, Jesus is the best pro-life story that's out there. He gave his life for us. Period. End of discussion.
All right, and there you have my highlight reel of the Speaking for Him podcast over the last 7.5 years, roughly. So, Adam, takes you back, huh?
Oh, my goodness. It's crazy. When you said that it was 8 years, I almost grabbed up for some lotion to put on my crow's feet because I can't believe it's that long already. That's insane. Gosh, but it's been such a fun ride. Man, I was thinking back to all the different shows we've done, and when you reached out to me last week about coming on and talking about stuff, I'm like, we got to do some really fun stuff, and for the Lord on top of it, which is just icing on the cake. So it's been an incredible ride, and man, you're making me missing it. It's not fair.
Well, like I said, now it's easier than ever for us to collaborate, so we should do that from time to time. So do you have any specific memories that particularly stick out to you when you think about it, Adam?
Oh, for sure. I'd have to say, if I thought back to my favorite show, there was something really special, and I love that you put it in the highlight reel, the one where we had the host Chris and Emily on the show. I tell you what, there was always fun energy in the studio, but there was something extra that night that was so great. I think, gosh, personally, I laughed 10 minutes after we stopped recording. It was so much fun, so high energy. Loved every second of it. Also, I loved the show where we had please throw something at the Zoom camera if I'm getting this wrong, but I think his name was Uncle Charlie, right?
Yes.
Is it Keys for Kids?
Yes, Uncle Charlie was on the show a few years ago, and I actually also did a tribute podcast about him after he passed away. I feel so privileged to have that podcast interview in our archives because people like him only come along once in a generation if we're lucky. And he was just a special man. And, I don't usually cry when I hear that people died that I didn't know very well personally. But Uncle Charlie was the type of person, number one, he made me want to minister for the Lord. So he is indirectly responsible for what Speaking for Him has become. Number two, he was everybody's uncle for worldwide for 50 plus years. And so he took that very seriously. And whenever I did see him, he always remembered me. He didn't forget who I was. I remember when I went to a summer rally stop, the week I was on the show, the week they broadcast the show that I was on, he saw me in the audience and he pointed it out to the crowd that was gathered there that I had been on the show that week, and that another gentleman who incidentally was a church friend of mine who was in CBH at the time was singing the song that I sang on the radio that week in the live rally. So I will never forget the impact that he had on my life. So it's definitely a big deal to me to have that interview. So I definitely agree. So Chad, do you have any thoughts about jumping into this craziness and taking over for a while from Adam?
I kind of felt like my role was more of an internship, kind of in between when in retrospect. Because I don't think I was with you for very long. We did, maybe 50 together?
I think it was something like that. I think it was something like 50, because then Adam came back and split with you for a while, and then both of you had to step away, and Dan entered the picture. So, Dan, do you have any thoughts to share with us on this 400th podcast?
Well, one, I'm surprised we made it to these 400. And now I'm trying to remember how many podcasts I did with you. Probably about a year.
Well, I think it was a little bit before that, because I think that I know that you were on that podcast with the people from On Plan, which was last April. So I think it was a little over a year. And like I said, basically you guys kind of helped hold me up while I was learning the ropes and learning to do stuff. And now this situation with COVID has caused me to learn to do stuff at home. And I'm just so excited about technology. We finally have a schedule for producing the Pilgrim's Progress multi-voice reading, because we're going to do it here on Zoom, and I just published the cast today, so excited about that. And if that goes well, I'd like to do more, because I always listened to audio Bibles, and they were fully dramatized, and I was like, why can't we do that with other books? So that's kind of one of my visions, to do more of that. So it should be interesting to see how it all comes together, but because of Zoom, we don't have to cram into a studio like we did with Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
Even though it worked.
That's awesome.
So
it did. Gosh, and that was one of the coolest memories too, being a part of the podcast, doing a Christmas Carol recording over a few weeks back in 2013 now?
Yeah, Melissa is going to actually be in Pilgrim's Progress as well, and she was looking back to see how long ago we'd done Christmas Carol, and it was 7 years ago already, and so that's just crazy, man.
Whew. It's been a lot of snow since then. That's wild.
Absolutely.
And you've been trying to get Pilgrim's Progress how long now? Is it?
I had like 3 different times already that I wanted to do it, but every time something came up, first it was Adam leaving for the first time and scrambling to find somebody else to produce, and then it was Adam and Chad leaving, so then it didn't get scheduled for that, and then it was coronavirus that delayed it, because I was finally talking very seriously with Dan.
Yeah, we were talking about it this last winter, and you're like, oh, spring.
And then it was like, psych, not really. So, well, it's super having you guys on. It's super being able to reflect on this. Whitney, I know you weren't real familiar with what was going on here. Have you listened to any episodes of the show before?
I have.
Okay.
A little bit.
So you've heard a few episodes in there. But was there anything that you wanted to share as we're celebrating this momentous occasion?
Well, I haven't listened to too many. I just know Andrew personally, and he has such a heart for the Lord and heart for people. It's just amazing to me.
This has been a super time. I was kind of hoping for more people to stop by, but I appreciate all of you for coming to celebrate this with me, and I hope that people will enjoy what we have to share. Does anybody have any final thoughts?
I have a story I forgot to mention earlier that is one of my favorite moments. It's actually from the first episode that we ever did way back in pre-crow's feet days. So when we were planning that week before our first recording, I remember we were talking about, other podcasts, kind of what they do with the length of the podcast, and that we don't want to go too long. And So we're like, all right, well, let's make sure we keep it at like 20 minutes, like 30 minutes tops, right? We don't want to go too far. We're not a, AM radio program. Don't go crazy here. So we're like, okay, 20, 30 minutes, call it good. Boom. We hit record. We get into it. It's our first go. Things go pretty smoothly. We say, thanks for listening. Talk to you next week or something like that. We hit stop. And Andrew, I remember you asking, you're like, how long was it? And I looked over and I was like, 8 minutes and 32 seconds. And I was like, I think we didn't go over. So it's awesome to see how far in 8 years, even with all the changes, the podcast has come. Because before, I mean, if you had a 10-minute commute, you can almost listen to 2 podcasts when we first started.
Well, and I know of people that have had, 3 or 4 podcasts, 3 or 4 different iterations in that amount of time. So the fact that we're talking about 400 is pretty significant. I do think that's a great story, Adam, and I don't even think it was 8 minutes and 32 seconds. I think it was closer to 7. So
might have been wishful thinking on my part.
There's no way that I could possibly thank the whole list, but a few people stick out. First of all, to Adam, Chad, and Dan, I wouldn't have gotten to this place as a podcaster and as a broadcaster if it wasn't for the 3 of you. I definitely was scared to death. Like 8 weeks ago when I ran out of shows, I was like, do I take a hiatus? Which I'm glad I didn't, because then 3 weeks became 6 weeks, became 9 weeks, became like 11 weeks since I've been out of the house except to go through the drive-thru at the bank. But that's neither here nor there. So I'm glad that I got the courage to spend a couple days on YouTube learning things. I'm thankful for all 3 of you and the effort that you put in to make sure that my podcast didn't pod fade. Because I seriously told Adam, I'm like, I think we might have to do a last podcast and say goodbye to Speaking for Him as a podcast, not as a ministry, but as a podcast. Because I wasn't ready to do at-home broadcasting at that point. Had no clue the capabilities of Zoom, had no clue about recording audio clips off the internet, had no clue about editing my own stuff the way I do every week now. So I needed that time from you guys to gain that confidence. I also want to say thank you to my first sponsor of sorts, True Life Bible Church, who has been a monthly supporter of Speaking for Him since March. I was able to upgrade my Zoom account because of their generosity. So True Life Bible Church is now an official sponsor of the Speaking for Him podcast, and I'm very grateful to them. And I'm grateful for Naomi Van Harn. Naomi suggested that we do a Speaking for Him book club, and while we're not regularly doing that right now, it really came at a time when I was starting to experience burnout in the podcast and being like, what kind of content are we going to do now? So thank you to Naomi for being that person to provide, to reignite the flame, so to speak, and keep me going for another several episodes. Thank you to the folks at Master Arts Theater for allowing me to profile their shows. I'm excited for you guys to do shows again so that I have more interviews to do for your company. I encourage people to support Master Arts if you can. Look at their YouTube channel, give them a financial donation if you're able, because, man, performing arts venues were one of the hardest hit things in this whole pandemic, because there's not curbside performing arts. So it's very difficult, but we have been able to do some YouTube things, so check out their YouTube channel. But the point being, I have so many people that have blessed me, that have seen fit to help this ministry. I'm so thankful to Brad Lanzer and Lanzer Broadcasting for supporting us for the majority of the 400 episode run that we've been on so far. And I couldn't be more grateful for all these people. And so I hope this shows you that it can't be a dynamic podcast if it's just me turning on a mic and droning on. Although that was the beginning. When I was younger and we didn't have all this technology, I carried around a microcassette recorder and I recorded everything that I did, all my thoughts about everything that I did. Probably annoyed a lot of people around me and my parents who bought me the microcassette recorder, but I'm thankful for that because that got my feet wet, so to speak. And as I progress and seek to get even better, I look back at the early days and the podcast itself and how that all came together. Because I basically said to Brad back then, I was like, if you don't have a job for me, if you can give me studio time so that I can get time behind the mic so that I can at least work on my broadcasting, that would be a blessing. And until the COVID-19 lockdown of everything, the door was always open. And like I said, I haven't made a final decision about the future of the podcast. There may be an instance where I would go back, but I also am excited about the advancements that are allowing me to produce high quality audio here at home. So I'm very grateful for all of it and grateful for all of you. And I'm so thankful that you joined me here for this 400th podcast. It's momentous. It's exciting to have that. And I couldn't be more thrilled that all of you are part of the story. And beyond that, you're good friends of mine, especially Adam. Adam and I have gotten really close over the years, and I'm just very thankful for that. And but I just want to end by just once again saying thank you to everyone who has supported me with prayers, with encouragement. It really just reaffirms that I am doing what God has called me to do, and that He is opening up even more doors, even though it feels kind of like we're all stuck at this point. There's still new doors opening every day, and I'm so thankful for that. And so I think I'm going to end with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for these 400 episodes of Speaking for Him. Lord, I pray that they have been a benefit and a help to those who have listened. Lord, I pray that if there are anybody that is hurting and they stumble across it, Lord, that they would be brought to you, Lord. That is the goal. And I believe that with your help and by your grace, we have met that goal over and over through these past years. And I'm so thankful. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen.
Well, I think that's about all I have time for. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please let me know if you want to interact with the podcast. It's easier than ever. If you have a topic that you want to discuss on the podcast, let me know, and we can set up a Zoom time to record an interview if you want to give your testimony. I really want my podcast, one of my visions for this podcast is to be a conduit so that other people can tell their stories of God's faithfulness. Because we can argue about doctrine and theology all day long, but the one thing that you can't argue with is the personal testimonies of the grace of God at work in the lives of other people. There's just something ironclad. There's just a tremendous amount of ironclad truth in the fact that I can say in my own way and through telling my own story that once I was blind, but now I see. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and that as always, you keep serving the best of masters.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Your host has been Andrew Gomison, founder of Speaking for Him. For more information on today's show and to leave us comments and voicemails, visit speakingforhim.blogspot.com. You can find Andrew's ministry at speakingforhim.com. That's speaking, 4, HIM. You can also interact with us at facebook.com/speakingforhim and on Twitter @speakingforhim. And when you look for us on iTunes and Stitcher, let us know what you think of the podcast by leaving a rating and review.